Come what may, bring it on. I'm gonna love it.
Welcome to LDS Unmarried Life, a podcast for single members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who find themselves single either because they're widowed, divorced, or not yet married. There is no affiliation with the church. And you can find this podcast on AnnetteTalks.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. And I keep knocking into you on the table, sorry, Alan.
No worries.
I make everyone sit close so we can all fit into the camera, because if you're watching this on YouTube, we are filming it. If you're not watching it on YouTube, you're just hearing it. So you might want to go to YouTube and see what we look like. So for my regular listeners, you probably know by now I'm getting ready to phase out this podcast and start my second podcast, which is going to be not geared towards just being single in the church. It's going to be about a lot of other things. So if you have something you want me to talk about, let me know right now. You can email me at Annette@AnnetteTalks.com or find me on Facebook at Annette Talks and let me know what you want to hear. All right, so today I'm really excited because I've been trying to find widowed people for a long time. And I've been, well, I should say a year. I've been running this podcast for a year as of next month. And I've had mostly divorced or not yet married. And this morning I had a few millennials, a couple 29-year-old ladies that were actually divorced. So it was an interesting episode. But I've been wanting to talk to widowed folks because your experience is so much different than ours, especially those of us that are divorced. I mean, they're both, you lose your spouse, but in totally different ways and totally different consequences. And so those of us that are divorced are always kind of curious about what you all have been through. And especially like when we're interacting with you, I think maybe a lot of us feel like we don't want to step on toes or offend anybody or anything. But we're curious about what you've been through and how it affects your life and your dating situation and going forward, whether you want to marry again and how that, the thoughts that go with that. So before we dive in, we need to introduce ourselves. I am Annette Bivey. I'm 51. I've been divorced for 4 years. I have 3 girls, ages 11, 10, and 8. And let's see, I just watched Downton Abbey last night, and it was really good. And I've been watching Call the Midwife. And so I've got like a British accent going, in the back of my mind all the time right now. And so I'm thoroughly immersed in British shows right now. Anyway, I love it.
All right, mate, or
Let's see. So I'm Alan Pack. I am 53. I have been widowed for about a year and 3 months. And let's see. I have 5 kids. My oldest 3 are sort of grown. My oldest still lives in my basement. But I have
never leave.
Yeah, but I have 2 that kind of just got home from missions, and one of them is back at BYU, and one's kind of working for a few months, and then we'll be back at BYU. And then I have a 16-year-old who has autism, Sam, and then I have a 14-year-old big kid named Nathan.
So you are not alone in that house.
Definitely not alone.
Probably never alone. Huh? You probably wish you could be alone sometimes.
No, actually, I enjoy having people. It would be scary to be alone.
Oh, I love my Saturdays when the girls are at their dad's. It's like chill time. This is great.
Yeah.
All right, Johanna.
I'm Johanna Wood. I'm 51. I've been widowed 5 years. I have 3 children. My oldest is 25 and married. And I have a 19-year-old and an 18-year-old, or just about ready to turn 19 and 20. So.
And so you're an empty nester.
I'm an empty nester as of, 8 weeks ago. My youngest moved out, so.
And we talked about this last time. Did we talk about it before or when you were on the episode that you're like cool with being an empty nester, right?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. It's a little lonely sometimes, but less stressful, so.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
Awesome.
I just have to get more social now.
Yes.
Before you're busy taking care of kid stuff, and now I'm like, okay, I need to make more of an effort to.
I'm trying.
do
I'm
more
trying to get you to
social
that
stuff.
dance. But
I know. I'm going to go to the singles conference in Nauvoo.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So that'll be my foray into single social stuff.
Yay.
Have you ever been to that?
Not to Nauvoo. I've been to
Okay.
like a Utah singles conference
Oh,
where I was one of the youngest. That kind of gives you an idea.
Oh, really?
I mean, it was a lot of fun, but definitely was like my mom's
Oh.
demographic. So,
Okay.
yeah, it was interesting.
So, I mean, I keep seeing stuff on Facebook. Like, I'm on a Facebook for Widows and Widowers group,
Mhm.
and they do conferences all the time. So I think maybe now I'll try and go to one since I don't have children to.
Is it LDS or is it just all?
LDS.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's an LDS group. I
Interesting.
can add you.
So
if
you
want.
haven't broached or
No.
gone into that at all?
No. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll add you.
I'll have to look. For
It's
So-
a huge group. I mean, like thousands of people from all over, even out
Okay.
of other parts of the world. So it's kind of cool. But like sometimes it's a little depressing because people who post are the people who are brand new, so they, they're understandably devastated. But
Yeah, they're reaching out right
Yeah.
away. I'm sure at the beginning it's got to be. I mean, I'm sure it's never super easy, but at the beginning it's got to be really.
it's really overwhelming. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
It's hard for me to imagine because the divorce thing it's devastating in itself, but it's like a different kind of devastating. You know, so like in my case, I'm the one that filed. Although I always think that in a divorce, both parties have made that decision at one point, in one way
Yeah.
or another,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
You know, like that you both choose by your behavior and your reaction to the behavior. But it's still a choice, whereas you guys didn't have that choice.
Right. And your husband, your ex-husband's still around for your kids,
Yes.
which I think is huge. Even though I think it also comes with problems
Mhm.
sometimes, but for my kids, their dad's gone. They can't talk to him. He can't come to their stuff. So I think that's a big loss.
So it's been
That's a
4
huge
years,
loss.
you said, right?
5.
5 years.
Yeah.
So was there a point where your kids wanted you to remarry so that they could have like another dad, or?
My oldest was already out of the house, and he's always been like, you should get remarried. My 2 younger kids were like, no way. My daughter is like, you can come live with me. I don't want you to ever get remarried. And I was just like, you know what? I'm not even thinking about that right now, so don't even worry about it. Now she's more supportive of me dating. And she did at one point say, I just miss having a dad. I wish you would get remarried so I had a dad. But at that point, it was like, she's leaving in a year. There's no way I'm going to find somebody and give her that experience. So, I mean, I guess if I had found somebody within the first year, but I couldn't have even, like, had a relationship that soon after my husband died. I was just, like, not available emotionally to do that, so.
I definitely think that's true. I think that one thing I read like just things about mourning and the mourning process and the mourning
The
cycle.
cycles, yeah.
And the first thing I read is that everyone goes through it differently. Like my father-in-law, my wife's parents, her mom died about the time we got engaged.
Oh, wow.
And he was remarried again in 6 months.
Wow.
And part of it was all his kids were out of the house. He was an empty nester, and so it was a lot easier.
Yeah.
But I think, at least for me, because I had kids on missions, I just was like, it doesn't feel right, because wouldn't that be weird to leave on your mission with a
Yes.
parent
Come home to a
and to
new
come home?
parent.
This is your new mom,
Oh.
So
Yeah.
for me, now that my kids are both home, I feel like I sort of can open that a little bit. But I do think everyone mourns at a different pace.
Yeah.
And one thing that I learned is you never stop mourning, but what you do is you kind of get to a point where you're sort of at peace and you're ready to move on.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Was
Yeah,
there like a
totally, I
specific?
agree.
Can you remember a time where you felt like that, where like you were sitting there and you're like, oh, I'm finally ready, or did it come over gradually, or?
I mean, I kind of was like, my youngest is a girl, so I was really kind of reluctant to even date, having a teenage girl in my house.
Yeah.
And I thought, I've got 5 years until she's graduated from high school. And I wasn't even really ready to do anything the first couple of years. And then my middle son, who has the mental health issues, has been a huge drama
Oh,
in
yeah.
our family. Also, not in a place to be able to have a relationship and deal with all of that drama. So I just kind of like, if I meet somebody, great, but I'm not going to go pursue anything
Right.
at this point. Now I feel like I have space to
So
maybe try and date or be social.
Okay, so since we're talking about you dating now, and that brings us to all the, remember I did some research since we started talking, because I had a listener reach out to me at one point and said he wanted me to talk to widows because he has a lot of young widow friends, and they say they have a really hard time getting men to date them because they can't be sealed
I have heard that.
to the widows. And so I started doing some research, and I pigeonholed one of the bishopric members from my ward, and he looked in the handbook and sent me some parts from it, and I talked to you a little bit more, and I've talked to a few other people. And so it sounds to me like if a widow wants to be sealed to a second husband, she has two options. Well, one, and this is something that my divorced friend reminded me about, and I know this doesn't apply to you too, but there could be someone whose spouse died and they don't want to be sealed to that person anymore. Maybe it was not a good marriage. Ask anyone that's ever been divorced. I don't want to be, again, I want to say this the right way. Ask anyone that's divorced, and if they're being honest with you, they'll say that at some point during the marriage or during the divorce process, they wish their spouse would die, because then it would be so much easier to deal with than going through,
Yeah.
you know. And I'm, you know where I'm coming from. I'm not making light
Totally.
at all of what you're, but say if I, you know, somewhere in my marriage when things were horrible, and they were through most of it, he had passed away, and then I had moved on and found someone else to marry, I would have taken one of those options, which is to have my sealing to him canceled,
Right.
which I didn't even know you could do until I just looked into it recently.
Yeah.
And so then I would be canceled to him, and then just sealed to the next husband.
Right.
And then the other option is that if you want to be sealed and you don't want your sealing canceled to your first husband, is that when you and your second husband both pass on, your families can have you sealed to each other posthumously.
Right.
And then I guess you make the decision in the next life.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. Have you spent much time thinking about that, or?
My personal feeling is like, practically speaking, it doesn't affect your marriage on the earth. It does, I mean, to some extent, right? Because it makes you more committed to a marriage. But like practically speaking, if you're sealed or you're not sealed, you still have to do a marriage. You still have to work at a marriage and have a relationship. And I just feel like it's all going to work out. Heavenly Father's not going to stick us with people we don't want to be with, you know? So I would say to men who are worried about dating widows who are sealed, it's like, the scriptures talk about taking care of the widows and the orphans, so like step up. If you fall in love with somebody who's been sealed, trust that God will take care of you for doing what you should do, which is
Right.
to love people and take care of somebody. And if you marry a widow, like double points, right? Because you're taking care of somebody who's widowed.
There you go.
I don't know. What do you think? It's not such a big deal, I guess, for men, because you can be
You
sealed.
can
to
be sealed
people.
again. But with you, of
Yeah.
course, then if you're sealed the second time, then you got two
Yeah,
wives.
it's not.
In the next
It's like,
life,
great,
then,
I'm a
uh-oh,
polygamist.
This is like meeting. Well, you know, I think
Yeah.
about like Elder Oaks, right? Because he's sealed
Yeah.
the second
Yeah.
time, right?
And President
And
Nelson.
President Nelson.
Yes, and
Yeah.
but I bring up Oaks because I just President Oaks because a few times he said, and maybe I'm reading too much into this,
Yeah.
but a few times in his talks he said, the companion of my life, or my eternal companion, or something, some phrase like that, referring to his second wife, that almost made me feel like he's saying, this is who I'm going to be with. And I thought, is that something he knows, or something he's decided, or is it just his way of letting her know that he's committed? I don't know. It's kind of an interesting
Yeah.
thing.
I know.
Yeah, because President Nelson was married to his wife for...
Well, and interestingly enough, Elder Tom Perry, he's had two wives, and when you look at how much time he spent with the two wives, I mean, he spent like 30 or 40 years with his second wife,
Right.
as well as his first wife. So I think we don't know enough really
Right,
to
and
understand
then you
what
can't
it's going
say
to be
just
like.
because she had X number of years, like
Right.
well, she's got more years, and so she's got
Yeah.
me beat out, or I've got her beat out. Like I know, I hate to even go there because
But we don't know what we don't know what life is going to be like after this
Right.
life. So it's kind of hard to say, well, here on the earth I wouldn't want to have X, Y, or Z, but it might be completely different. So
That's a
Yeah,
good
I
point.
completely agree. So I was gonna say my father-in-law remarried, and we were like, that is way too soon. How could you? You're giving up on, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And several of the daughters were like,
very upset.
I don't care who she is, I'll hate her forever, sort of thing. No, and they actually now all get along really well. But his wife, his second wife, is like, even though I never knew her, I feel like we will be really good sisters and friends, and she'll be like, thank you so much for taking care of Richard when I couldn't be there. And so I think I agree. I think don't think of things in terms of earth. So much of marriage is a very earthly, live together, eat together sort of relationship that won't be the same in heaven. And so it's we shouldn't think of it with our small minds, I guess.
It's hard not to.
Yeah, I agree.
But some of us like me, I tend to overthink everything.
Yeah.
But so I didn't know, how you two thought in terms of that. Well, okay, then that brings me to the other issue that I have never dated a widower, and I don't know any men. Well, I think I might have one friend that went out with a widow before, but when us divorced folks talk, because when we date other divorced people, we know what we're getting into, and it's usually very difficult, which is why I wrote the book, because there are so many things that you have to deal with, because you've got kids some are similar as dating a widowed person, because you've got kids to mesh, but you also have an ex, and there's financial obligations, and there might be, kids are shuffling back and forth, and all sorts of things that you have to try and somehow, fit together. But if you date someone who's widowed, then there's a third person almost in the room. Like my friend says there's the angel spouse syndrome, where, and I don't know where you got it from, but, you would be concerned that you'd walk in and like, am I always compared unfavorably to the first spouse, because that person is always, going to be kind of remembered for all the great, wonderful things, and I'm going to come in and be this totally imperfect person, like, because that's what we are.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that depends on the widow or widower, how they feel about their spouses. I mean, my husband was not perfect.
Yeah, my wife was certainly not perfect.
So I'm like, I would hope that whoever I date or marry is okay with me, like, referring to my life with him, because it's part of who I am, right? But, I mean, there was plenty of times early in my marriage where I wished he died, because I was like, I don't want to get divorced,
so
but I don't want to live with you anymore.
Right, you do know that
Fortunately,
feeling.
by the time he did die, our marriage was much better. So it was devastating to have him go, but also was grateful that I loved him enough that it was devastating to have him go,
Yeah.
But I mean, I would hope that I could just take a new relationship for what it is and not be like, oh, you don't do it like Tom did it,
So you wouldn't be like pining. I mean,
I would hope not.
right.
Yeah.
Like,
I think anyone who's honest has got to recognize that every relationship has its struggles.
Yeah.
I think every married person has sometimes thought, ugh, I hate that about you.
Yes.
So I think everyone's a package, right? And I think that a smart widow person would say, I just love this person for who they are, and take the basket of good and bad and try to love and mentor and improve,
and
what
not try
I
to
can.
be like reproducing something that you had before.
Right.
I mean, I think that's the
Yeah.
benefit of having been widowed for so long. It's like, it's hard to remember what the day-to-day life was like with Tom, so I think that'll be a blessing.
So you don't think you've idealized him at this point, where everything's good? Because I know sometimes we tend to do that. I mean, sometimes I'll do that on purpose with something, because I do not want the pain, right? Like when I think back into my marriage, I honestly don't think about it very much. And I don't allow myself to bring up specifics, because when I do, it's like a deep dive back into difficult places.
Yeah.
So I don't think, but he's certainly not idealized. But I could see where it might be tempting, especially when you're really mourning, because you're still fairly new, right? To go back and like really focus on all the really good times to help you feel better. And so I just wonder if is there a tendency to idealize her at all and think everything was just so great?
Not with me.
No. Okay.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, it's not totally on topic, but one thing I would say to people is, don't be afraid to just talk about it with people, because somebody who's still grieving shouldn't probably not be at a single, who's still hard grieving should probably not be at a singles event. And if they can't handle talk, one thing I read is if you can't handle talking about the person, you're not ready to be out there.
Yeah.
If you still cry when it comes up, then don't be out at a singles event, because that's not fair to other people.
Right.
But back on the topic, I just think anyone who's honest has got to recognize that every relationship had its issues, and that they're, every new relationship will have some issues too. And what you do is just try to find one that you can live with the dark side.
So true.
My personal quote is, find someone whose faults you can live with. Because we
Yeah.
all have them.
Right.
So it's like, if you find someone whose faults, those faults mesh really nicely with my faults.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Or I can live with that stuff. That doesn't bother me too much.
Right.
I
Whereas
mean,
other things would make you crazy.
Right.
So you don't want to be with someone with those things. Interesting. So, so we talked about this before we started recording, but share with us how you each lost your spouses.
my husband died of cardiac arrest suddenly, just before his 49th birthday. I was actually out of town taking my oldest son to college, and my daughter called me and said, "Dad won't wake up." So I was an hour west of Grand Junction driving home.
So you weren't even there.
Oh my
with them.
gosh.
That's terrible.
Yeah, I drove home by myself for 6 hours.
Oh my gosh.
It was awful.
I
I mean, it
can't
was very
imagine.
traumatic. Every time I made that drive for like 3 years, I would just
gosh.
cry. So, yeah,
6 hours of,
yeah,
I'm,
shock.
yeah.
I mean, I called.
I'm amazed you could drive it, actually.
Well,
Yeah.
for a while I was in shock, but I'm like, I gotta get home. I have kids, and there's nobody there. I mean, there was. My brothers came and took my kids and stuff, but I hit rifle and like kind of had a breakdown. I got off the road and sat in the parking lot and sobbed and called my mom, and she's like, "We're on our way. We'll come and get you." And I was just like, I can't sit here, so I got back on the road.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's hideous.
it's kind of hideous.
It must have
Yes.
been really hard for your daughter too. I always
Yes.
imagine the person who finds
Yes.
the dead person. I just think, oh my gosh, that
I
is
know.
just a memory that you never erase.
No, and I think
know?
for a long time she was 13. Her brother was there, but he was pretty oblivious to what was going on. But I think at first she didn't realize he was dead because he was diabetic. So she thought that he was just having a reaction, and we couldn't get anybody. I mean, I told her, I tried to call around at the neighborhood to have somebody come and check, and we couldn't get a hold of anybody. So I told her to call 911, and so I'm on the phone, and she's calling on the other phone, and then the paramedics come on, and they're like, "He's been gone for a while." So, yeah, so there was no like resuscitation or anything, and she wasn't in the room. My brother had come over, and my brother was the one that told my kids that he had passed away. But, yeah, I wasn't there. And when I got home, he was gone. They had already taken his body.
Oh, gosh.
So I came
like a
home,
hole.
and my brothers and their wives had come to the house, and they had like cleaned everything, and they'd they'd done all the laundry and stuff. Like I didn't even have shirts or stuff that like smelled like him. They cleaned everything. I was like,
Oh.
That's too
yeah,
bad.
that was a little hard, to
Yeah.
come home and like, yeah, it was weird. So.
It's like he's there, and then he just wasn't.
Yeah, yeah, and I can't share that experience with my daughter because I wasn't there with her, And then she has pretty much refused to talk with professional help about it. She just doesn't want to go there. It's painful. So, but she feels guilty. Like she should have checked on him.
Oh, she couldn't have done anything.
No, you can't. That's the thing. Afterwards, I was doing some research, and like people who have cardiac arrest, they like unless they're in a hospital, their chances of survival are like really, really low. Because even in a hospital, they're pretty low because you're trying to get that electrical impulse to restart, and it's not like having a heart attack where you can just keep the blood flowing and then the heart will, So, but that doesn't. I don't think that you can know that intellectually and not feel it, right? And I
Right.
think that for her, that's what she's dealing with. So.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I had a weird reaction because I think a lot of people that I've talked to, like, they don't want to be in the same room. They can't sleep in the bed, Like,
Oh,
for me,
right.
that was like, oh, this is where we were always together. This is very comforting to be here in this room, in this bed, in this house. So.
Have you felt his presence?
I'm not overtly like but I feel very peaceful in my home, so I have to assume that's him.
He's
No, I'm like
watching over.
skeptical of signs, so that makes it hard for me to like say, oh, this is a sign from.
right.
But we have had a couple of experiences, like we found an Easter egg hunt or Easter egg that he'd hidden. He was a big hider of the eggs, like all these crazy places, and we found one the next year, you know, and
Wow.
he was the cook and no recipes. He had left no recipes written down. And I was talking to a neighbor about not quite a year after he died, and I was telling her, it sucks because I can't even reproduce his food, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, I think I had his rice and beans recipe, which was like a signature dish that he made all the time. And so I got his recipe and we made it, and it was great, you know, to be able to have that smell and taste and stuff. So I feel like those are kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I hate to say the word signs, but
Or do you ever dream that he comes to visit you?
I've had a lot of dreams with him, more than I think I do. Like I'll wake up. I mean, I never dream about him, but then I started reading through him. Like I dreamed about him a lot, especially when he first died.
Mm-hmm.
But he was always like, "You're supposed to be dead," and that would always wake me
Right.
up because I would be like,
That's funny. I know I lost a cousin when she was in her 30s, and this was almost 7 years ago now. And there have been a few times when I felt her presence. One time, because my sister named her daughter after her middle name was her, and at the baby blessing, when he pronounced her name on the baby, I was like, I could totally feel him. She's here. And I went up to my aunt, her mother, afterwards, and I said, did you feel like Natalie was here? She says, oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And there was another time when I was driving past Bronco Stadium, because she used to live here. This was her hometown. This is not my hometown.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, this is totally Natalie's town. And it was like, I swear she was in the car
Yeah.
with me. And there was another time she was in a dream, and I remember her hair was fabulous. And I looked at her, I was like, Natalie, you're not here, you're dead. And she just laughed. And I thought, that's just her way of being like, this, you know,
Yeah.
everything's good. And so there have been many times when I felt, you know, just kind of,
Yeah.
she's around.
I've had a couple of nieces get married since Tom died, and one of the nieces, we were waiting and waiting and waiting for the sealer to come in, and then this other sealer came in that they weren't expecting. And he came in and he's like, you know, we had to mix up, but I'm here. And he gave the most beautiful talk about the witnesses that come, the angel witnesses that come. And he talked about that they're family members, you know, and I did feel like Tom, of course, was here, you know, like I feel like he's been working to get all of his nieces and nephews married because they're all old and they haven't gotten married, but a lot of them have married since he died. So I mean, I definitely feel like I can see him doing stuff for us. I don't know that I have like personal feelings, although I always feel like I've visited with him when I dream about him. So
I was going to say, do you ever feel like
Yeah.
you talked to him? Like,
well, I just like I can remember like the first couple of years I would just be giddy in the morning because I'm like I got to spend time with him. It's just kind of silly, but better than feeling sad, because I think a lot of people, they have a dream and then they feel sad because he's not here, you know.
right.
So
What about you, Alan?
So let's see. Our stake went to Trek,
oh yeah.
and I took my wife came and my two younger sons came, and we were on our way back. It was kind of the end, and we were all exhausted, and so we were in Wyoming, and she fell asleep at the wheel, and we had all fallen
So you
asleep.
must have been asleep too then.
And so when I woke up, the car was already, you know, like tilted
Yeah.
off the highway, but we were going 75 miles an hour.
Oh.
And I was like, I woke up. So, and then we did a couple of quick turns, and the car rolled in. 3 seconds later, she was gone. And
Oh my gosh.
the roof of the car crushed in.
Oh my goodness.
And
So you were with her.
right, so we were all together, and I think in some ways that was a real blessing, because my kids, we all went through that together, and you know, we all know what happened.
Right.
Yeah, in some ways terrible,
Yeah.
terrible, but
Yeah.
I am so grateful they were both there, to be honest, and
Yeah.
I'm grateful I was there.
Yeah.
When the car came to a stop and I realized, hey, I'm alive, and I've survived, and I looked over and I could see that she was likely dead. It wasn't gruesome, by the way.
Okay.
It wasn't horrible, but I could just say from the position of her body, you don't survive, looking like that. And she wasn't responsive, and So I basically just held her hand, and I had just an amazing, peaceful feeling where, and it was a split second, but it was very powerful, and it was that feeling that this is going to be really hard for you, but it was her time to go and be at peace and just pick up the pieces and move on. But don't mourn and don't feel guilty for this situation, because this was her time. And so that really helped.
Yeah.
That really helped, because even though it was still, a horrible sudden loss that you're terribly sad at, I didn't feel like God robbed me, or that there was something I should have done. Like one thing I still think is, if I had just woken up, if I hadn't fallen asleep, I could have grabbed the wheel. Those things you think, and I think it's impossible to not think those. But
I think it is too.
But the Spirit says no, that is not how it happened, and so I should just say, I have a son who has some emotional anxiety, suicidal issues, and he was he was my youngest, and all of the rest of us just, got up and walked away, and we were fine, except for him, and he broke his wrist, got really scraped up, and got a concussion. So relatively not badly harmed, but in all of that he went through, there were so many people who reached out to just let him know, we love you and we care so much about you, and he got so much attention that I just think it was one of those little coincidences that he happened to be there. It was a way for him to get close enough to death to realize how awful it is, and to realize how many people care about me.
Yeah.
And so even though obviously you'd never choose to go through that,
Right.
When I sit back and think about it, I think, wow, that was orchestrated in such a way that he came out of it much stronger.
Yeah.
And so anyway, there are blessings.
So there
There are. I
Um,
felt like that with my husband dying, because, Andrew was getting to a point where we couldn't manage him very well, and then my husband passed away, and I really couldn't manage him on my own. But because my husband passed away, there was life insurance money to send him to a facility that we could have never done
Wow.
when Tom was alive. So, mixed blessings, right?
Yeah.
So you both feel like you were kind of taken care of.
Taken care of, yes. I think, God, He doesn't always stop things from happening, but He uses them to make things good happen, right? Maybe they would have happened a different way, but He doesn't leave you alone with negative stuff, so.
Right.
Yeah, one important thing that I think is different in a divorce is, typically in a divorce, that's really financially hard on both of those people. But in the situation of a death, if there is life insurance, there is not a financial hardship dimension,
Right.
which makes it a lot easier.
Right.
Although every once in a while you do hear about those people,
Don't have.
who are doing like GoFundMe, and it's
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, why didn't they do at
I
least a
know,
little
I
life
know.
insurance? So
I
if
knew-
anyone's out there and you have kids and you don't
Yes.
have life insurance,
Get
please
life
get
insurance.
some.
Yeah, I knew of
And
a,
no one paid me to say that, by the way.
right. No, I knew a guy that 5 or 6 years ago, I heard about his passing on Facebook, and he had had 5 kids, and I think his wife was pregnant and no life insurance, and died suddenly in a car accident, like a rollover kind of thing on a long trip, and I just thought, oh man,
I know.
that's so terrible.
When my husband died, the only thing that changed in our life for the first year was that he wasn't there. I didn't have to go to work. I didn't, people brought us in meals, so we replaced the fact that he wasn't cooking. I mean, really, apart from him being gone, everything else stayed the same. I think that was really helpful. I can't even imagine having to go work full time or sell a house or all those kinds of things when you're in the middle of grieving. So
Right.
Yeah, that would just add a deep pile of problems on top.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure. Well, so it sounds like you both have had some really great experiences around such a terrible experience, so that you feel like Heavenly Father loves you, knows what you're going through, and is there for you through the whole thing.
Yeah.
Pretty much. I think we have some of that in divorce. It's just different. You know,
Yeah.
it's messier, and it's obviously not final as far as
Right.
this life goes, and we're still dealing with it. But it's good to hear your stories, because I had only thought about those questions that I had asked you ahead of time, and not so much about the experiences that you've gone through and what you're still kind of feeling from it. It's nice to get that perspective.
You know, one thing I was going to say though is every single has got baggage.
Yes, they
Yeah.
do.
You know, like that's something
True.
I've noticed is at first when I started just trying to meet people and just kind of figure out who's out there and what is out there, it's like, you know, people that have been single forever and never married, they have some issues.
Yep.
You know, people that have been divorced have, you know, kind of similar issues. And one thing that's interesting, I don't know how it is for you, but whenever people meet me, they're always like, so how did you get divorced?
Yes.
You know, because there's just the assumption that
Yeah.
everyone is divorced.
Yeah.
And then people who have gone through a widow, you know, lost a spouse, same thing. There's baggage.
Yeah,
So you just
different baggage.
it's different.
Well, and
Yeah.
just because you lose your spouse doesn't mean you had a great marriage. So, you know, there's the wide spectrum of people who they're glad their spouse is gone, to where they're totally devastated because it was their whole life. And so, you know, it's not just the same with divorces too, right? Some divorces are messier than others. So,
Yeah, no, and just from being alive, we all have issues,
Yeah.
right? So they're just different. But yeah, it's definitely the single scene is a really difficult, a difficult scene, which is one of the reasons why I've been doing this podcast, because everyone wants to feel heard and understood, and we all need help. We all need to know that we're in a community.
yeah.
But it's definitely a difficult.
I think it's just hard to be alone.
It is.
I mean, and I have friends that have never married, and I think they've done this for their whole lives. Why is it so hard for me? But I think if you have lived with somebody and then you live alone again, you're just like, you just don't realize how many things you did together and supported each other, and that relationship that you don't duplicate in any other way. So
Yeah, it's a partnership that you don't have anymore.
You don't,
Yeah.
and you can have great friends and you can have great family, but it doesn't duplicate that unique experience. And I think if you don't have it, you miss it. If you've never had it, you still miss it, because we're wired to want to have that. So
Yep.
Yeah.
So we're all out there kind of looking. So do you both have interest in remarrying?
I'd like to.
Yeah. My wife and I used to say, hey, if I died, please remarry and please be happy and go on with your life.
Well, yeah, mine too. 'Cause my husband was a diabetic, so he was always like, "I'm going to die young," and I'm like, "You're not going to die young.
Yeah.
Don't say that." And of course, you know, he's smarter than I am, so but yeah, totally like.
So did your wife ever say anything about not living a long life at any point that you can remember? Like, I always wonder if people have that kind of idea, you know, like at some
My
point.
husband
you
was
know.
just kind of pessimistic about stuff like that.
That's a general-
You know, I many times had a prompting that I would outlive my wife.
Really?
You know, and it's just those weird things you think about, and
Yeah.
you're like, whatever, you know, and you
Right.
don't even think about it. But when I look back on my life and things, I think, oh boy, I think the spirit was just kind of,
Preparing
hey,
you.
get ready, you know.
Wow.
So yeah.
Yeah, I had a whole plan for when my husband died, because
Really?
yeah, I'm like, he's diabetic, he might die. I should have a plan. So I didn't follow any of that plan, but I had it.
Okay.
So,
That's
yeah,
interesting.
Yeah.
No, because I feel like I'm going to live way longer than I probably want to.
Yeah,
But,
me too.
I often wonder, like when my cousin passed away,
Yeah.
she was in her mid-30s, like I said, and when she told us she was diagnosed with cancer, and she was gone in 6 weeks.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
I mean, so fast. I, to this day, regret not going out to visit her. 'Cause my sister, who was her age, we had all been roommates when I was in law school, and so we were really tight. Like, she was more like a sister to me than a cousin. And so Jane was in Australia.